Hello and welcome back to Travel Market Life. And in today's episode, we are discussing travel finances and business risks with our usual guest panel, Claire Steiner, James Clark, and Will Plummer. I'm your host, Ryan Haynes. So we'll be covering with our special guest, Martin Alcock, a specialist in solving regulation, finance and strategy problems, the autumn budget 2024 as it looms in towards April, mergers and acquisitions, currency and deposits.
Welcome to Travel Market Life, your companion for industry insights and professional business development. Travel Market Life. Join us by webcast, video or podcast.
All right, guys, so the new government's in power. It didn't take long to bring some sweeping changes to our entire industry for travel and hospitality, and there's a lot of change on the horizon financially for businesses. How are you feeling about these impending changes, Will?
I can see what they're trying to do. I don't think it's not hitting the right notes for me, to be honest, especially the pressures around national insurance, business rates, minimum wage, that kind of thing. As a small business owner, that comes with pressures in terms of employment, what that looks like, expectations of employees. We were talking about that before. And I don't think it's sent the right sort of waves across the economy in the UK at the moment. So something needs to happen. I'm prepared to give them the benefit of the doubt at the moment. I mean, let's see the actual effect. We're all kind of worried about what's coming and what's going to hit in April. So benefit of the doubt, but after a couple of really buoyant years, my gloom and doom might finally come to fruition and sort of pay off. I do worry that things are going to change for this industry and it's going to get tougher for people out there, unfortunately.
Interesting. Okay, I mean, over to you, James.
Yeah. I dare I say, I think I've spent too long with Will because I actually agree with everything he says, and I'm usually the Mr. Positive, but I slightly cautious about what's going to happen in April, and I'm worried about what the effect will actually have on salaries. And I think that's my biggest worry, because I think we've cultured an environment where most employees would accept or be expecting a kind of inflationary pay rise or even a larger than inflationary pay rise. And I don't think that will happen. And I think that cost has been probably under considered when businesses of say 70 to maybe even 100 employees could be adding anything between 50 and 100,000 in costs for the increase in taxation. That's a lot of money, and that's got to come from somewhere. So you're either adding it to the consumer or you're reducing your costs inside by saying we can't pay as much as we were last year. And it will also stem recruitment, I think, Paul. So I'm sitting more in the Will's camp of I'm a bit worried.
Now, Claire, I mean, this is all done to also support employees, not meant to penalise them. Where's your feeling here?
I think I want to try and put a positive spin on it if I can.
Fantastic.
I'm going to try. So there's no doubt that it absolutely, as Jen just said, will have a knock-on effect on things like recruitment and potentially on what salaries will look like. However, I think things like minimum wage increase, the apprenticeship levies and stuff like that will be good thing for our industry. We do traditionally employ a lot of younger people at the start of their career. And I think that will enable us to potentially open up and do more at that end, encouraging the younger people in. I think what it will do, it will make employers start to look at productivity a lot more closely and what actually is happening with those people, that they're going to cost them more. So they want to make sure that they're getting that return on their investment. So the productivity will come under. And that's not to say that I don't want to be unfair on everybody, because everybody I'm sure does a great job, but businesses will want to see that the staff are doing that. And one of the things I think we will see is businesses still pushing back and getting staff to come into the office more, because there is still a feeling that people are more productive if they are at work in an environment where they can bounce off each other, particularly for new members of staff. I mean, there's that whole, bringing them into the culture. There's been a lot of talk around, younger generation saying, I'm not going to go work for a company that doesn't offer flexible working. And I think flexible working is part of it. But actually what I'm seeing and hearing is younger people are the ones who actually want to start coming into the office more because it helps them learn about jobs. It's the social side of it. There's the mental health side of it. But it's actually maybe the staff that are a little bit more settled. They may have moved out, during the pandemic and bought a nicer house. They may have caring responsibilities. And suddenly they're faced with this, hold on a second, what do you mean I have to now come into the office 3 days a week? And there's that, you mean I have to prove that I'm doing my job. But I do think employers are going to be looking at that. And I think productivity will be really pushed on that one.
I mean, it is interesting what they've come in with. It's a lot of change. And I was certainly expecting tax rises and the necessity of it. But it does feel that we're in the austerity that we should have been in like over 10 years ago, which is interesting. But bringing in Martin Alcock now, you're a specialist, particularly in solving regulation financial strategy problems. There's a lot here to digest, from the increase in national insurance to increases in national minimum wage and national living wage, business rates. How are businesses getting their heads around this?
Yeah, well, firstly, afternoon, everybody. Can I just say I'm enormously grateful for being invited along to this little party. It's good to see you all. I suppose, looking at the big picture, I think the intention of the government, inflation's been a big challenge for the last 2 to 3 years. Even today, wage growth, although headline inflation's kind of been tamed and we're back at that 2.5% level, so not too far away from the target. Wage growth is still over 5%. So I think the government's intention is to try to get that under control. And there's 5%, James, your point, staff are expecting and getting a 5% pay increase every year. That is inflationary, that's more money that they're spending. That means cost of goods rise. So I think the intention is interesting, it hasn't even come in yet, and you're already seeing a reduction in vacancies. That's a reduction in hires. I think that's all by design. Ultimately that is, it feels like for the last few years, really, the employees have had the power and the employers are the ones who are having to accede to the demands of ever higher wages. There's an argument that says, you get reduced vacancies, that power balance shifts a little bit. You do start to see over time a reduction in salaries. But the flip side of that, of course, is that all of the people selling goods and services are going to have to put their prices up to cover that. So you start to get inflation in goods. It's a really difficult balance. I think the government are backed into a corner. It's a very fragile economy that they're trying to work with. If you buy this story of the £18 billion black hole, they've got to try close that gap. So it's a tough place to be, but definitely we're all going to be feeling the pain.
I mean, what I found fascinating is that as they've brought in all these policies, you've seen their cost of borrowing increase. And if you reflect it back on the previous Labour government, their cost of borrowing was at the same level. Yet during the last 15 years, however many, it dropped. And it's the fact that, as you say, they seem to be sort of wanting employees to be more productive. Yet they're also bringing a raft of legislation that supports the employee from in day one of having their rights in the workplace. So it seems like it's a lot of navigation that as businesses we have to do around maximizing productivity, ensuring the best welfare of your staff. But then how do you look at that bottom line? How do you make sure that you are balancing the profitability of the business positively?
Yeah, I mean, if you just take that national insurance policy, if you're employing someone on a £40,000 a year salary, it's an extra £1,000 a year cost. So if you're a business that employs lots and lots of people, that quickly adds up. You've seen some of the numbers on large employers, both in the travel industry, but elsewhere, high street type companies. It is a huge extra cost. I think on the top of all of that, the government is in this. There's a global component to all of this. The bond markets wobble that we saw in the first couple of weeks of January, where really the government's cost of borrowing started to go up. I think it's unfair to say all of that was the government and all of that was lack of confidence in the budget. I mean, the budget was October, so it's been a few months. I think a lot of that is Europe-wide. Actually, if you look at Germany, they went through a similar thing. It's the Donald Trump effect of everybody panicking that, we're talking on the day of his inauguration, he's coming in with 200 executive orders. He's probably about halfway through signing. Some of them are tariffs and trade barriers that, it's a make America great, it's America first. What is the corresponding impact on the UK and Europe? And I think, so there's an aspect of all of that, but definitely the government has backed themselves into a corner as fast as they're trying to generate more. The cost of borrowing is going up, which is eating into the headroom. It's a delicate balancing act. I think you bring that back to the travel industry, though. It's about cutting your cloth accordingly. So the sort of work we do with companies, the cost of employment is inevitable. We're going to have to deal with that. It's about how can you find those productivity gains elsewhere, and how can you also shave costs from other areas. As an example, the cost of processing payments. It's an area that we're doing a lot of work on, looking at, well, are there ways that we can sort of trim that? Are there alternatives? Are we in a relationship with a merchant processor, for example, that we've been in for too long and we need to look again because the business is in a better shape? So those sorts of things are the other opportunities to cut costs.
I mean, it's fascinating because I'm working with a company called Guestline, part of Access Group, and they've acquired a load of technology recently for the hospitality industry, and it's how they're connecting all these technologies, which the hotelier generally already has, to bring the automation into play, so that they don't have to have the staff doing the manual, labor cumbersome data entry, data manipulation role, that it just actually doing it for you. Payments is a big thing. The time that it used to take our reservations team to compile the final invoice for a guest, and now all that really should be automated. There's no reason why it can't be. And I think that there is that need to employ much more automation. It's looking at what your staff do that adds value. And one of the things that I noticed since the pandemic, and this used to be something that we used to look at every year, was the productivity barometer. They always said whether productivity went up or down. Since the pandemic, I don't think we've seen those barometers at all. So it would be really interesting to see sort of like where we stand today, because I think that always gave business leaders a gauge in how they needed to manage their staff or ways they need to incentivize a business and their people to produce more. And I guess with people, it's one of the things that you have to, I guess, work with a lot more, Claire, is how do you help managers and leaders inspire people to do more?
Yeah. I mean, I think, we're going to be talking about AI, forever, aren't we now? There's no doubt that we will see changes to people's roles, taking away to some of the more mundane tasks, which for most people will be a good thing, but no one likes to do that. It will change the types of roles we have in the business. Playing devil's advocate, I go back to my earlier point about bringing people together. So actually, if they're not sitting at home doing a mundane task, but you want their skills and everything else, do you need to have them together, in an office, in a group environment? What about if you're upskilling people? Because again, some of the skills that they're doing are being taken away by technology. You want to keep them in the business because they're valued members of staff, and obviously recruitment is an issue. So, is there something to be said for then having that team environment? So the playing devil's advocate, because I think there are arguments for and against that.
But I come back, and I'm interested to know what you think on this, Claire. I go back to Martin's point about the power shifting back to the or to the employer. And I think, dare I say, employees have become a bit complacent in recent years about, this whole working from home, going back into the office, but also perhaps a bit more selective about the jobs they're prepared to do. And then you hear all the stories about fearing losing their jobs to AI. Are we not actually pushing, or is the budget and the sort of considerations being made actually pushing the direction of travel? And how, I'm interested how you see that from a sort of employment side of things, legal.
I do agree with Martin. I do think there is a shift. I think you're right. I think we came out of the pandemic and, dare I say it, Brexit, with this in our industry, in particular in hospitality, with this whole, where are we going to get our staff? And they very much had a lot of the power. And we talked about the war on talent, and we have talked about it for years, but it seemed particularly pertinent as we came out of that. And we seem to, buy into this whole, we've got to do what they want to enable us to keep and maintain our staff. Actually, what's going to happen now is all very well saying we're worried about recruiting staff ourselves, but so is every single other business. And so so staff are going to be thinking about, well, okay, there are less vacancies out there, so my jumping around isn't going to be as easy as it was. If you're a good employer, staff will want to stay with you.
All right. Okay. So quite a lot there packed into what's coming up and how it's going to hit, but a lot of discussion about how we can sort of figure out a way through this and the opportunities there for the business. Now, there's a few other things that you're sort of seeing on the horizon, particularly within our space. One of them being the mergers and acquisition, the M&A market here in travel. What are you particularly noticing?
Well, again, it's probably worth saying, we're having this conversation the first couple of weeks of January. January is such a pivotal month for the travel industry, isn't it? It's some of the tour operators we work with. can expect to sell 20-30% of their holidays in this 1 month. So we've talked a lot of doom and gloom, a lot of the challenges coming down the tracks. But actually, if you look at what consumers are spending their money on generally, lots of parts of the economy are really suffering, whereas travel is outperforming almost every other consumer class. If you look at the data on restaurant spend, on footfall in retail environments, that's all down or struggling. Travel is still in growth. So I think coming back to the M&A question, the reason we're seeing a lot of appetite is, and that's really been the story of the last 12 months, has been, I suppose, two things. One is travel is outperforming. And so there are investors sitting there with capital to invest, and they're looking at consumer businesses and they're going, travel is the standout class. Let's go for it. The other thing is the budget we've already talked about. The announcement or the impact there and then wasn't as bad as everyone had feared. But what the government did do was lay two very clear milestones, one being April coming up, where capital gains tax, or more accurately, the business asset disposal relief, which is the relief you get when you sell your business, the first £1 million of gains, you pay a lower rate of tax. They've said they're going to increase that by 4 percentage points in April and then another 4 percentage points next April. So that's created these two milestones where we're working with a lot of owner-managed businesses who say, well, I was thinking about selling. I definitely should try and get it done by one of those 2 points because I save a big chunk of money. So I think those two drivers, the attractiveness of travel relative to other investment classes, and that sort of backstop that the government have laid out, have driven a lot of activity. It's been so much, really.
Do you see that continuing sort of medium in the UK? I mean, I see the attractiveness in the travel industry. I think there are a lot of reasons why deals are still happening now and will still continue to happen. As you say, there are those two milestones coming up. But sort of looking ahead with your crystal ball in a couple of years down the line, let's assume there's still money about. Are we making the UK an attractive place to do business and to attract that kind of money? Because travel is global, increasing global. I'm interested in your view. I do think it will slow down, and because of the sort of friction points that are being put on it, investors are going to look elsewhere in the sector.
Yeah, look, it's a difficult one to call, isn't it? I would say that the investment isn't uniform across any travel business. There are very clear winners and losers. So it's still the high quality assets, the companies that are specialist in some way, that have got differentiated product or a proposition that you can't get elsewhere. They're generally the people who are selling to the demographic that's got all the money, which is that sort of 55 to 65 kind of age bracket.
Yeah.
So you've still got like demographics going in the right direction, and that we're a population that is generally aging, and it's the older people who've got all the money. But that being said, I think you're right that it's a very competitive market. I mean, if you look at the amount of capacity that's been added into the market this year, I think just looking at the Atoll data, it's about 31.5 million of packages on sale. There's a big question about whether they can all be sold. Now, there'll be specialists in amongst that who'll do very well, but there's some mass market operators who really won't, actually. And anyone who's caught in that space, because there's the big guys doing seemingly really well. And anyone who's caught in that middle space where there may be mass market, pretty kind of undifferentiated product, but they don't have the scale to compete with a Jet2 or an EasyJet holidays, they're the ones that you think will struggle. So it's a really mixed bag. I don't think you can definitely say everyone's going to earn out and everyone's going to be able to sell their business. But again, time and time again, it always comes back to that. If you've got differentiated product, if you've got something that you can't get elsewhere, that's what you want to be aiming for.
What about actually starting a business? What do you feel the market and the climate's like now over the next couple of years, actually starting a brand new venture?
We're still seeing lots doing it. Interesting, again, if you go back to that Atoll data, you're seeing a real mix effect at the sort of smaller company end. You see lots and lots of new entrants coming in, and you're seeing lots dropping out. Now, I put that down to, I think, the sort of mindset post-COVID. I know we're a few years after COVID now, but there were a lot of people who went through hell and really struggled to keep the lights on and have just gone, I'm done, I can't do this anymore. So there's a lot of willing sellers and willing kind of, but you're motivated to get out of the industry. But at the same time, travel has got this allure, hasn't it? That everyone who's been on a holiday kind of knows what they, or thinks they know what constitutes a great trip. So you've got this steady queue, endless queue really, of people going, oh, I think I could do that. It's a great industry to be part of. So you're seeing people dropping out because it's tough. You're seeing new people coming in with a great idea. I think, always the fundamentals are can you raise enough money to get it off the ground? Can you find enough customers to get the traction?
I was going to say one of the big areas that we've seen a massive rise on in the industry is not necessarily the tour operator space, but it's actually in the home working travel franchisee space, getting records. Every week we're hearing about record breaking news on all the home working businesses, more and more people coming in. Again, I think the pandemic is, a lot of people have that reflection. They might not have, and some of the success stories, people did come out from other industries into travel because, I've been on holiday. But they're doing really, really well. And I think that alludes to what you were saying about, how big travel stays.
I was going to say, actually, I think starting business now is probably quite a good time because you know what the playing field is. We've kind of had the buoyant years post-COVID, post-Brexit, and the more traditional operators have been able to operate in much the same way. There has been that demand from travel. So, they've got through or they've prospered from it. As Martin says, some people have fallen by the wayside. But actually starting now, travel is still in demand. It's still what people want. You're now going into it knowing what Labour's blueprint is for the economy, for employment. You've also got all these tools. You've got your AI, you've got everything else. So if you innovate and if you look at where the opportunity is in the sector, I actually think you're going to see a really interesting wave of startups coming into the industry. And actually, it's probably quite an exciting time to start up. But don't go traditional. You've got to be looking to the next phase of the evolution of travel, in my opinion.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I think it's really interesting about how the opportunities there are for building business and, how existing businesses are going to see a future for themselves. Now, over to our final point today. It's looking at the change in deposits and deposit taking and how they're handled within the industry. You've particularly noticed that these have reduced in size?
Well, I think it's probably a function of the amount of capacity on sale, but you do tend to see that when there is all that capacity. Again, particularly in this month where it's so important, I think, for the big players to get off to a good start. But we do see these crazy low deposit schemes. I mean, James, you mentioned you've seen quite a few of them around. These are either low or no deposits, make your booking now. I guess there's always big risks with that I see. One is it's very easy to cancel. So logically, you do get an uptick in cancellations later on. There's very little sort of downside risk. But it also puts an enormous pressure on people who maybe don't have as deep pockets to be able to fund those low deposits. Because if you're selling package holidays with a low cost flight component, you've got to pay the flight out. So low deposit means whoever's offering that low deposit is funding the payment of the flight usually. Now, again, you've got to have deep pockets to be able to do that, but it's attractive. No, really, you can sort of see the attraction to the customer, can't you? It's, in a sort of a tight environment to be able to make the commitment without really having to spend any money.
Yeah. Is this something you're seeing, James?
I think particularly from the asset holders and the large businesses and large operators who can afford it, what it does do is it does apply pressure to the smaller mid-sized operators who can't afford, especially if they're buying the elements of their package. So if you're not buying an EasyJet holiday, a Jet2 holiday, so you're buying it from a mid-sized tour operator or a small-sized tour operator who has to go and buy those EasyJet flights and has to go buy that hotel element and pay up front. How can they afford to give you a zero low deposit option? So it does put pressure on them. But obviously, that's one of the advantages of being a large tour operator. They've got that in their armory, haven't they? They're saying.
It's fascinating. I've been, when I look at booking, I find that if it's a really low deposit, as you say, it just becomes, well, it's just throwaway. Am I really committing to this? So is this actually a trip I really want to be taking? And it makes me actually think twice. But if it's like an accommodation and it's like in a few months' time, and I'm thinking, well, I'd rather pay, a down payment, but only a month before, not like 3 months in advance, then, that's certainly my preference. It's when they're sort of like asking for a down payment almost immediately, which you're not going to get back, which, non-refundable rate, so to speak, I'm not particularly interested in. But it is interesting how it does change a consumer's perception on the value of what they're buying, whether it's a holiday or a product itself. Is it anything that interests you? Do you look at deposits there, Claire, when it comes to your trips, or are you?
No, well, I'm a bit old school. We were talking about this when it comes to things like your home insurance. That you always know that when you push that button, it's going to be cheaper for you to pay all up front than it is on a direct debit on a monthly basis. And I kind of feel that way. I think unless I'm doing a last minute, I don't really care, jump on a nice cheaper holiday. If I have something I want to do or an event I'm going to, I want to know that is protected, that there's no hidden costs, that I'm going to get the hotel I wanted, the flight I wanted. And I have this nervousness of putting a deposit down that they say, well, actually, we're now not going to do that flight because we haven't had enough take up on it or whatever. And now we're going to move you to, and I'm sure it won't happen, but I just have this nervousness about it. I just feel if I pay for something, I'm more protected and I'll get what I want rather than if I just put, James, I know you're going to come.
No, I was just going to say a random question for Martin. I know this one. Are you still fully financial protected as an individual, even if you've only paid £50 of holiday?
You are, yes. So the actual protection, for example, would cover the amount of money you've paid. So you would only be covered for the 50 quid in the event that it failed and you didn't get that holiday. But yeah, it comes in as soon as any money's paid.
Well, there you go. We've had a whistle-top tour around quite a bit of area for the travel industry around finances and business risk, particularly with the impending changes coming from our new government. And hopefully that's giving you a little bit of insight and some thoughts for how you can move forward as a business. So firstly, thank you, Martin, for joining us today as our special guest and sharing your expertise. And thank you as well, Claire, James and Will, for your points of view. We'll be back with our next episode, so watch out for that in the next few weeks. I'm your host, Ryan Haynes. Thanks for listening.
For more, go to Travel Market Life. The music sensation by Zach Nelson is reproduced under license from Storyblocks. Travel Market Life is a Haynes Marcoms digital marketing agency production, serving the travel and technology industries.